Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of CAIR National, welcoming you to today's special episode of CAIR on Air. I'm here with my co-host, Ayan Ajeen. Assalamu alaikum, Ayan. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum, Edward. Good, alhamdulillah. How about you?
I'm good. And a welcome to all of you viewing online and those of you listening on AM 360. Thank you so much for joining us. As you all know, we are, 12 days away from the 2020 election. The American people will have a chance to make their voices heard in local, state, and federal elections, including the presidential race, inshallah. And so today we're going to be discussing the issue of voting and what to do if you experience any difficulties voting. We all know that there are some serious concerns about what might happen on election day, everything from disruptions at the polling places, machines not working, harassment by extremist groups. There are all sorts of concerns that people have about what might happen with this election. And so today, inshallah, we just want to walk you through some of the basic do's and don'ts of voting in case it's your first time, but also what you should do if you experience any difficulties at the polls on November 3rd, inshallah. And may Allah forbid that happens, but we all know that we hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So, Ayan, why don't you introduce our guest to help us discuss this topic?
Yeah, so for the presentation today, we have Zana, our CAIR staff attorney, and Jordan, our civil rights legal intern. And they're going to be going through a presentation for the Know Your Rights at the polls. Assalamu alaikum, Zana and Jordan.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you?
Welcome back to the program. It's always good to see you. And welcome to Jordan. We're very happy to have you as part of the CAIR team. So on election day, inshallah, CAIR attorneys, like many other civil rights groups, are going to be standing by in case people have issues experiencing religious discrimination, bigotry, or other problems at the polls. But ideally, we want to avoid that stuff happening by preparing people in advance, by helping you to make sure that you can nip these issues in the bud and avoid them altogether on election day, inshallah. So first, let's start off by going with a very basic question. Who, generally speaking, is eligible to vote? Zaina, can you just run through the basics for us? People may be voting for the first time.
Yes. So U.S. citizens can vote in the elections, and you need to meet your state's residency requirements. You need to be 18 years old on or before election day, and you have to be registered to vote by your state's voter registration deadline.
Right. Now, it's also important to note that generally speaking, there are American citizens who cannot vote, and oftentimes, for example, convicted felons lose their right to vote. However, in some states, the law has changed, and now people who have, committed some sort of crime in the past, they paid their debt to society, they're now able to vote again. So I believe that's the case in Florida and some other states. So you want to obviously check in your local area to see, what is the relevant law that may or may not apply to you, and so to make sure that you know whether or not you were able to vote. And obviously, the ability to register to vote, is pretty much over by now, I think, in pretty much all states. Some states allow same-day voter registration, so that is you could actually show up on the day of the vote and register. That is rare. It's not in most states. So again, checking your local area to see, what the rules are for you. Ayan, you take the next question, inshallah.
So a lot of people are registering to vote, or they're going in to vote early. And so Jordan, can you tell us some of the ways that people can get their vote out early? Like what can we do if we want to avoid going in on election day?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two main options for this. The first is just to vote early within a center, or the other is by absentee vote by mail ballot. So some states allow any voter to vote absentee, others have more strict requirements. So this is definitely something you want to check within your local area to see what their requirements are. Also to follow up with what was said earlier, it's really important to keep in line the deadlines because some have specific deadlines for absentee ballots and voter early in person. So once again, check in with your local area to see what their regulations and requirements are for those.
Absolutely. And I'll note that, a big concern we have, and both of you know this, is that with mail-in balloting, this is not controversial, at least it has not been in the past. People have always been able to send in absentee ballots. But now, obviously, certain political candidates and elected officials are, raising suspicions about whether or not mail-in balloting is safe and reliable. It is. But the one danger of people mailing in their votes, especially if they're doing it for the first time, is that you might make some minor mistake that results in your ballot being thrown out. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, you'll get your mail-in ballot, your absentee ballot, and when you send it back in, you can't just send the ballot in a mailed envelope. You have to put the ballot inside the safety envelope, and then that goes into the outer envelope. And if you don't have that, your ballot inside the safety envelope, then you could face some issues with having your ballot counted. And so that's the case in other states as well. So if you're gonna do mail-in voting, it's just so critical that you make sure you follow the rules closely. I'll give you another example, that when you fill in your mail-in ballot, right, and you write your signature on it, in some states, they will then check to see if the signature on your ballot matches the signature they have on file for you, either from a prior registration or from your driver's license. And so that could be a very old signature, right? It may not match up with how you sign your name now, or you may just decide you're going to sign your name in a different way when you write your ballot. So those are also things you have to watch out for to make sure that you were addressing that issue in advance. My own mother actually went and contacted the county to get a look at what her signature looked like in the past to make sure that it wouldn't look different than how she's signing her name now. So the point being that there are many ways you can get your vote in early. But I'm telling you, there are election attorneys who are looking for excuses to throw out ballots after the election. So you've got to make sure if you're mailing your ballot, you do it as precisely right as you can. There are great organizations out there that can help you and make sure you're doing it correctly. But there are many ways to get out your vote early if you are concerned about voting on election day, either because of COVID or because of the potential for long lines. Zaina, next question for you. So let's say you decide you're going in to vote on election day. For whatever reason, you don't want to do the mail-in balloting. You didn't early vote. You decide you're going to go in on election day. You want to do it on November 3rd. So let's say you get to your polling place, and when you go in to vote, you're told that your name is not showing up in the list of registered voters, right? That they're saying we don't have any record of you being registered to vote. What does the person do at that point?
So if that happens, you should ask the poll worker to double check for your name on the list of registered voters, and make sure to spell your name for the poll worker. And if your name isn't on the list, ask if there's a supplemental list of voters. And if they still can't find your name, confirm that you're at the correct polling place. Sometimes it might be the case that you're just voting in the wrong location. So you can try to request that the poll worker check a statewide system, if there is one available, to see if you're registered to vote at that polling station or at a different polling place. If they don't have access to that, ask them to call the main election office to see where you're supposed to be voting. You can also contact a hotline and ask for help verifying your proper polling place. But in certain states, there might be a way for you to check online, or your state might have a specific number for you to call so that you yourself can check where you're supposed to be voting. And if you're registered to vote at a different location, you're going to more likely be required to travel to that location to cast your ballot.
Right.
What if you had changed your registration, and like how long would that usually take for that to come up in their system?
So that should be available in their system, but it's always important to double check. If the poll worker is not finding your name there, the poll worker can call and ask where you're supposed to be voting. You yourself can check. And in a worst case scenario, ask for a provisional ballot. And then as long as you're eligible to vote, that ballot should count.
Right. And I'm very glad you mentioned that, Tina. That's very important that, you should never, if you're turned out to vote and your name isn't showing up and something's wrong in their system, don't ever just walk away without filling out a ballot. At the very least, worst case scenario, fill out that provisional ballot, turn that in. And if indeed it turns out you were registered to vote, they messed up on their end, then your vote will eventually be counted, inshallah. But again, the way we avoid this in the first place is you check online or call and just triple check to make sure you're going to the right voting location, because it can change from election to election. You might have voted in the Republican or Democratic primary earlier this year, and that might be a different location than when you're voting for the general election. Or you might have voted in a mayor's race, right? Some off-year local mayoral election. That could be in one place. It's completely different than when you're voting in the general election. So again, avoid these issues by just checking before you go to vote well in advance and just double checking, triple checking to make sure you're going to the right place to vote.
So our next question is for Jordan. So for people with disabilities who are going in to vote, do polling places have accommodations?
Yeah, so great question. The basic answer for this is yes, they should, because under federal law, all polling places have to be fully accessible to older adults and voters with disabilities. And simply allowing curbside voting is not enough to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it is a requirement. So they should have that. So if you are having any issues or you need any help with anything, election officials must provide you with help when it's possible to do so. So you can always go and ask for their assistance. And it's also really important to note as well that any voters who have mental disabilities cannot be turned away from the polls because a poll worker thinks that they are not qualified or eligible to vote. Only a court judge can decide for those types of instances. So if a poll worker turns you away, that's something that they are not allowed to do. Another option that people have with disabilities is that they are allowed to bring a family member, a friend, or really any other person of their choice to assist them at the polls. The only exceptions is that you can't bring an employer or an agent of your employer or union. But other than that, you're allowed to bring, again, any friend or family member or anything like that. And it's always a good idea to let the poll workers know when you're checking in if you need any assistance for these as well.
Right. And again, it's important to note that, in different states, the election laws can vary somewhat, right? So in some states, who you can bring in with you might be different than the law in other states. So if you're going to do that, this is, again, something you want to check in advance just to make sure that you're doing everything within the law in your particular area. You don't want to give them any excuse to turn you away from the polling places. Now, let me ask a follow-up question, Jordan, for you, Jordan. What about people who may not be proficient in speaking English? Or maybe they speak English, but they're just a little worried that, it's a second language and they may not be able to completely understand everything on the ballot. For example, the constitutional questions that are on some ballots at the end, the referendum type questions. What can a person do? Can they bring in someone to help them make sure they're reading the English correctly?
Yes, this is actually a pretty similar response to the last question. In this case, if English is not, if you're not a very strong English speaker or reader, you are allowed to bring and receive in-person assistance at the polls from a person of your choice. Again, as you mentioned, there are some regulations within this, so definitely check your local area to see what their policies are regarding this. It's also worth checking because some counties are actually required to provide bilingual assistance. So once again, inform a poll worker and check before when you get there to see if they provide these options.
Wonderful.
And Zana, can you give us a few examples of what voter intimidation, how it could present itself? Just so if we do see this while we're at the polling places, like we know.
So there are different examples of voter intimidation that can happen at the polls. So number one, if someone is aggressively questioning voters about their citizenship, criminal record, or other qualifications to vote, falsely representing oneself as an election official, displaying false or misleading signs about voter fraud and related criminal penalties, other forms of harassment like harassing non-English speakers and voters of color, and spreading false information about voter requirements, saying you don't need to speak English to vote in any state, you don't need to pass a test to vote in any state, or I'm sorry, not that they're saying those things, but you don't, some states just, I'm sorry, I'm like getting mixed up because I get so nervous when I give presentations. But basically it's not allowed for people to spread false information about voter requirements. So make sure when you're going to vote, just be aware of those situations. And if those situations do happen. There are different things that you can do. You should make sure that you are able to cast your vote. So make sure that you're able to vote. If someone is harassing you, inform a poll worker. If a poll worker is harassing you, there are different ways to report that harassment. You can contact your state or territorial election office. You can contact the voting section of the Civil Rights Department of the Department of Justice. You can use an election complaint report online form, and you can contact CAIR. Our lines are going to be open that day to make sure that no one is having issues when they're voting. You can call us to ask questions. You can call us to let us know if you're being intimidated, if you're being prevented from voting. And our attorneys and our other staff are going to be on standby, inshallah, to help everybody out.
Absolutely, inshallah. And we'll be posting the hotline number and the other information, a voter complaint form, so you can save that, and we'll be posting it in the lead up to the election, inshallah. I think the thing that many people are worried about is that President Trump has encouraged people to sign up as poll watchers, which is fine, but it's important that people know that you can't just show up at a polling place and declare you're going to be a poll watcher. You have to register in advance, right? And usually the state will have a very limited number of people who are allowed to do that. And you cannot interfere with people voting, right? So if you're showing up to vote and someone is harassing you, speaking to you for that matter, right, you don't need to be talking to anyone except for the people who are actually running the election, who are asking for your information. So if you've got people there who are armed with weapons standing outside, any sort of thing like that that is frightening you, please reach out to us, let us know that, so that we can see if there's anything we can do to address that problem, inshallah. We are concerned about the possibility of that sort of nonsense happening at the polls, and we just want to make sure that no one is frightened away from voting. You have the right to vote. People have died for your right to vote, and don't let any politician, no matter their party, scare you out of exercising your right to vote on or before November 3rd, inshallah. Ayan, I'll turn it back to you for the next question.
Well, I just want to thank our presenters for this. I actually waited till today to vote because I wanted to make sure I knew everything going in. So thank you, and thank you for letting our audience know, so they can be prepared when they go to the polls.
Absolutely. And again, so on election day, if you experience any of these or other issues, especially anything where you're being targeted because of your faith, if you're visibly Muslim and someone's harassing you, please reach out to CAIR. If you have a voting issue in general, there are many hotlines you can call, but you can also call us, and we can try to point you in the right direction if it's just a voting issue in particular, inshallah. But just whatever you do, don't let yourself get turned away from the polls on election day. You've got the right to vote, but just make sure you're thinking ahead, preparing in advance, and doing some things we suggested. Double check your address, make sure you're going to the right location. If you're mailing your ballot, make sure you're doing it exactly as the rules require. And if you're going to vote on election day, inshallah, make sure to bring your ID if it's required, and make sure that you have the numbers ready to call. Have CAIR's number with you in case you need to call us. So you don't have to leave the election place. You can stay there, call us, and hopefully, inshallah, get some help. But again, we hope we hope that you don't need any of this information. We hope you have a very easy time voting. But again, expect and hope for the best, prepare for the alternative. Thank you both for joining us. Inshallah, we'll be talking to you on election day and beforehand. And inshallah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
And to all of you, thank you so much for watching today's episode of CAIR on Air, the special election training. Inshallah, we will be seeing you again next Tuesday for a special program. We're going to do a 2-hour program on Monday, the day before the election, inshallah, to encourage people to get out to vote and to talk about these issues related to voting. And then on election day, on November 3rd, inshallah, CAIR is going to be having a day-long program from 12 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the evening, Eastern time, where we're going to be doing live election coverage, highlighting and speaking to Muslims turning out to vote, Muslims who are working to protect voters, Muslims engaged in the political process. We're going to make sure that we're highlighting the great things that Muslim Americans are doing around the country to make our voices heard on November 3rd, inshallah. So we look forward to seeing you for special programming with CAIR next Monday, starting at 3 o'clock, inshallah, and then Tuesday, election day, starting at 12 o'clock, inshallah. Ayan, did I miss anything? Anything else we need to tell the people about?
No, we have a training next Wednesday, the 28th, and that's going to be by voter experts. They're going to be talking to us. It's going to be similar to this, but we're going to expand on it a little bit. So there's that, and then the following week is when we're having the two programs that you just mentioned.
Right.
So,
Well, did I bring the election up a week earlier?
Yeah.
I'm so ready to get this over with, Diane. Whatever's going to happen, I want it to be over with, inshallah. Yeah, so not next week, but the week after, November 2nd and November 3rd, obviously, inshallah, will be our special election coverage. Jazakallah khair. This is why you need a co-host, ladies and gentlemen. All right, thank you all so much for watching online, and thank you to our viewers on American Muslim 360. Inshallah, we look forward to speaking to you again next week. Until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.
Assalamu alaikum.